Certainly. Thank you, Assembly Member. We are taking a number of steps to make sure we are moving as quickly and as safely as we can as we bring about the safe closure of the Exide facility as well as the restoration of the communities around Exide. I know it can seem like it takes a long time. The process under which hazardous waste facilities are closed under federal law is a very lengthy and involved process precisely because these are hazardous waste facilities and great care needs to be taken to make sure the closure is done properly. In order to make this happen as quickly as possible, as part of the enforcement order that I mentioned earlier, Exide was required to finalize for us a draft closure plan that they had been working on for some time, and they were given only 90 days to finalize that plan. We laid out a process for our own review of that draft plan that was much, much quicker than is normally done under closure proceedings. You're going to hear a little bit more about the closure plan and the enforcement order, what the interplay is with those two things at the next panel, I believe. However, I will say that the Exide closure is unique because of the existence of the enforcement order that takes it out of the normal regulatory stream and puts it into a somewhat specialized process for the facility itself. We are following the timelines in that order. We've set aggressive milestones for ourselves for our own review. But we are being a little bit flexible on those milestones because we want to maximize community involvement in the closure process. So we had expected that we would have already completed the closure plan approval by now and that closure would be beginning shortly. However, we took additional time prior to the release of the draft closure plan to work with the advisory group, to work with the technical advisor for the advisory group and get input prior to release of that draft. We have also, as you will hear, extended the comment period on the draft closure plan at the request of the community, which delays a little bit the start time for the actual shovel in the ground work that will be commencing at the facility later this spring.
Just a follow-up question, if that's okay, Ms. Garcia, that I jump in ahead of you. Thank you.
Quickly, please.
And just to address a couple of other issues, I mean, I do want to mention the county's participation in helping, and it's been spearheaded by former Secretary of Labor, currently chair of the Board of Supervisors, long title, Solis. And so thank you. I know she's in the crowd here and has been a staunch supporter of our community and has helped worked with us. But could you tell me a little bit more, perhaps, about some of the coordination that could happen in working with the different agencies, because it is complicated and it is unique, and you know, because I think this will help probably address some of the confusion, or probably, you know, and I'll say it again, you know, the lack of confidence that we're moving in the swiftest way possible. What kind of coordination maybe between the county and DTSC, or what kind of further coordination, or where can we improve?
Yes, certainly. Thank you. We are coordinating with a number of agencies, including the county, both on the closure and on the cleanup. As I mentioned, the South Coast Air District, and Dr. Wallerstein is here today, is a partner with the department in convening the advisory group that you were so interested in having us bring about, and that you have personally participated in. In addition, on that advisory group, both Supervisor Solis and the director of LA County's Environmental Health Division serve on that advisory group. We also have a representative from the city of Vernon who serves on that advisory group, US EPA, as well as representatives from other state elected officials and local elected officials and congressional representatives and senators all have representatives as part of that group. So it's a forum for quite a bit of coordination between different levels of government. In addition to that, as part of the closure plan review process, the staff at DTSC is in close coordination with the South Coast Air Quality Management District staff to ensure that air impacts associated with the closure are properly dealt with at every step of the way. And then we are coordinating with LA County. We have weekly coordinating calls with LA County around the sampling and cleanup work that is being done in the residential areas around Exide. I have a meeting tomorrow that includes their new chief counsel as well as the head of their public health office. So we have a number of people coming. It will be a large meeting talking about a variety of issues dealing with the testing and the cleanup. We are endeavoring to make sure that we work closely with them as well as with other elected officials and other agencies. In addition, we will be talking later today about the issue of lead-based paint in the community. There have been people who have questioned why we are concerned about lead-based paint. There are three basic reasons we need to pay attention to it. First and foremost, it's part of the exposure picture. The lead in the lead-based paint contributes to the exposure of the people living on the properties, just as the lead in the soil does. And it's important that we provide a full characterization to them of what that exposure is. In addition, if the paint is in deteriorating condition, and you will hear more about this later, it flakes off into the ground, and we have had instances of properties that we have spent upwards of $40,000 remediating, and before we can finish the re-landscaping of the property, it is already recontaminated with high levels of lead. The lead-based paint chips can contain tens of thousands, in some cases almost 100,000 parts per million of lead. It's very, very high, and it's something we need to be aware of in order to be responsible stewards of the public money that is now being spent on the residential cleanup. But the third reason that we need to pay attention to the lead-based paint is in order to hold Exide accountable. We don't want to be in a situation where the specter is raised that none of the contamination is the result of Exide's participation, which they have suggested to us, and we have no information to dispute that. So we are carefully characterizing the contribution of different sources to lead contamination at the site in order to be able to have a robust analysis and a strong case for holding Exide accountable. So we have ongoing work we need to do in that area. In particular, when we identify properties where lead-based paint contamination is contributing to the exposure of the families because the paint is deteriorating, we are trying to bring partners together at the local level, and we're seeking federal funding through grants in order to be able to stabilize that lead-based paint so that we can eliminate that exposure pathway. We don't want to be in a situation where we have a child that has elevated blood lead levels and we aren't able to prevent that exposure effectively because we're leaving an important part of that exposure in place. So that's another area, I think, where additional coordination is needed. The department currently doesn't have resources that we have the authority to spend on lead-based paint remediation, but we're trying to make sure that the stabilization of the deteriorating paint is part of the picture going forward.
Thank you very much. Question by Assemblymember Garcia.
Thank you. So I appreciate the update both on the cultural sensitivity and training going on in the department and the closure and the continuous input from the community. And while that's delayed the process, it's much appreciated as we're building trust. I know that we are now going to be moving to a more expedited testing process. So far, we've tested about 5% of the potential sites. And so is it an issue of funding? Will a $70 million one-time budget request help expedite this into getting houses tested at a much quicker rate, so people are informed of what's going on. And then it's our goal to ensure that we can go after Exide. Is that the number one priority, or is our number one priority to clean up these homes and remove the lead, whether it's from the paint or from Exide out there? I know we're trying to balance that, but where's our priority as far as timeliness and the testing and cleaning up?
That's an excellent question, Assembly Member. Let me be very clear. If the department had wanted to wait to hold Exide accountable before doing cleanup, we would not have moved into using what is called our CERCLA authority, which is a different statute. You heard about the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, or RCRA, which is the statute under which Exide was requesting a permit and is moving through closure. Normally, that would be the genesis of the corrective action, which is where cleanup occurs. However, we didn't want to wait several years into that process for Exide to complete its study and make its proposal about what the cleanup would include, and then begin with them funding that cleanup. Instead, we have used our CERCLA authority, which is a different federal statute, under which we are moving ahead with state money to do testing and cleanup, with the expectation that at some point we will be recovering that from Exide. So we aren't delaying the work in order to build the case, but we are making sure that as we do the work, we are collecting all the information we need to collect, so that when the time comes to make that case, we have the information that we need.
On the $70 million one-time fund, would that help expedite the testing? In addition to, I know we're going to go with a different type of testing, but will that help expedite? And is that a discussion that your department has been having with the governor? I believe part of your problems are not yours. I do believe you're committed to the change, but you can only do so much with your funding. An additional $8 million in the budget for 2 years only gets you so far for the whole state. That's not just for Exide. And so I understand the financial constraints that you're under and everything you're trying to balance at statewide. Here, with an additional $70 million one-time funding for Exide testing and cleanup, help expedite the process?
Well, certainly additional money is going to be needed as we move into the next fiscal year. What the department has been doing is preparing its comprehensive cleanup plan. We're working with the Secretary and the administration on the scope of that plan and evaluating the appropriate level of funding in order to get that plan in place as soon as, and the cleanup going as soon as it is approved. We believe the funding that we have right now will keep us testing properties through the rest of this fiscal year, as well as doing cleanup on the highest priority properties that were already identified in the expanded testing area. And we'll be talking about that program going forward. So we are actively evaluating resources right now, and I don't have a number that I can put out there that says this is what we need, but we are looking at what the comprehensive cleanup plan is going to look like and what resources will be needed to have it roll out in a responsible and also a quick way.
And I promise this is my last question then. So at the rate we're going, with the plan you have, how long will it take before we have tested all of your high priority properties?
So we have funding in this fiscal year to test 1,500 properties. So we will be needing additional money to continue that testing, and we'll be working with the administration on what the scope of the testing and the cleanup will look like in the next fiscal year.
Is the high priority more than 1,500?
Well, we need the test results in order to determine what the priority of the property is. So we will be testing all 10,000 properties, give or take. And then based on those testing results, we will identify the highest priority properties for cleanup.
That'll happen this year?
We will not have tested all 10,000 properties by the end of this fiscal year. We will have tested 1,500.
Thank you, Director Lee, but I did want to let the public know the reason we asked some of these other questions because this committee has oversight over DTSC, but I do recognize that Director Lee came in about a year ago and really facing a really troubled department, and certainly I think taking the right approach with her commitment to environmental justice, hiring more staff, and taking these direct approaches of involving the community. And we want to continue to see more of that. And, you know, it's a very hard task, but certainly I want the public to know that this committee called for an audit of the DTSC, which was released to the public in 2014. And we carried 5 pieces of legislation just last year to give DTSC more power to impose fines, have greater interest on those fines so that people pay quicker, power to subpoena records, and the power to shut down and not renew permits, as we've seen in the past. So these are all steps in the right direction, but a reminder that we still have a long way to go, a lot of work to do ahead, and we're all partners in this. And so we remain committed to working together, and the main goal is to make sure we give the results to the community as quickly as possible. With that, thank you very much. We do have other panelists to come up, so thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next, given the number of speakers on this next panel, we first of all want to call forward our second panel to have a specific discussion on the Exide facility closure plan. But because we have numerous speakers, I'm going to invite first up Los Angeles County Supervisor, former U.S. Secretary of Labor, Ilda Solis, L.A. County Department staff, and additional community members to sit at the table first. And after they're done, we'll call up the second panel, second group of witnesses in this panel that will speak, and that's going to include representatives of Exide, representatives of DTSC, and Barry Wallerstein from the South Coast Air District. And before Secretary Solis begins, I'd like to provide a preamble for this panel. Given the regulatory history of the Exide facility, we are holding this hearing to make sure the legislature remains well informed about the closure of the facility and in tune with the planning, closure, and ultimate remediation of the surrounding communities. It is our role as an oversight committee to understand and ensure that the closure plan of this controversial and lead-laden facility is airtight, is fully funded, and fully implemented. We have invited speakers to our second and third panels to share with us their role in developing and ultimately implementing the closure plan, and the subsequent panel will share their perspectives on the proposed closure plans. I'd like to note that the final closure plan has not been adopted by DTSC yet. The department has issued a notice for 60-day public comment period in early December. That will end in early February for the draft plan, and the comment period is ongoing as of now. And now I'd certainly like to welcome back to the Assembly former Secretary of Labor and new County Supervisor Ilda Solis, and we have 20 minutes to share your perspectives with this panel on the Exide closure plan. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members of this prestigious committee. I'm honored to be here this afternoon with you and speak to you regarding my perspective and some thoughts on the Exide facilities cleanup. We do have other witnesses alongside with me, our Los Angeles Department Interim Director of Public Health, Cynthia Harding, who is here, Angelo Balomo, Director of Environmental Health. We have 2 community witnesses, Mark Lopez, East Yards Community, and Terry Cano, also an East LA resident. I'll try to be brief and on point. And again, I want to thank you for hosting this hearing to allow us to give you some background. Before I begin, I just want to mention I do represent the 1st District in LA County. It's comprised of 23 cities and over 200,000 residents in unincorporated areas such as East Los Angeles. 2 million people proudly call their home in the 1st District. Largely Latino, I'd say roughly 70% of the population. And in this particular area that is affected by Exide, I would say the median family income is about $32,000 per year, and you're looking at many single-head household women with children. Just to give you some perspective, I am now serving as chair of Los Angeles County Board of Supervisors, and I'm responsible for protecting the health of the residents, not only of my own district, the 2 million that I represent, but also the 8 million that comprise the County of Los Angeles. Over the past 2 years, I've been engaged with members of our community, many that are here today in the audience, but also many that could not make the trip here to Sacramento. I've worked with advocacy groups as well as those neighboring communities alongside the Exide facility. And I've heard many of their concerns and the challenges that they've shared with me, in particular related to the toxins emitted from the plant and those who have lost family members from rare forms of cancer and other diseases, and from both health and environmental experts who are familiar with lead and other toxic materials and chemicals that have detrimental health effects. What I'd like to do, if you'd allow me, is to introduce some people that couldn't be here today. And I'd like to show you this photograph of a young man. His name is Anthony, Tony. If you look at the photo, he looks like he's 15 years of age, young man from East Los Angeles. In fact, he's actually 10 years older. He's 25 years old. Tony grew up a few blocks from Exide and was first exposed to lead, arsenic, and a slew of other harmful chemicals emitted from Exide while he was still in his mother's womb. Tony was first diagnosed with cancer at age 17. Since then, he has had multiple operations to remove malignant tumors from his brain and his spine. His spine is now deformed and getting worse. His doctors tell him he shouldn't even be alive today. But he's brave and he's fighting hard for his life. And he's living proof of what Exide has done to people in our community. But he's also proof of that resiliency in our community. So another family I'd like to draw your attention to. They couldn't be with us today. This is the Vallejo family, a family that both I, as well as Assemblymember Jimmy Gomez, met on a cleanup site in the neighborhood. Unbeknownst to us, we didn't know that this family also had a history with Exide. We learned later in meeting the family that the 6 children that she has, all of them have some asthma or were born prematurely. All of them were born in this community. The child that's being held up by the father has many developmental disabilities. He's deaf. He has problems using his arms and his legs. He has to wear braces. He also had to have recent eye surgery. Our offices were able to help him obtain health care. Because many of the residents there work minimum wage or less. This mother of 6 is a classified worker, works for LA Unified School District, but a very proud resident and very humble woman along with her family and many of the families that are here also in the audience. So I also want to pay my respects to this family, but to those individuals that are also here. But more importantly, what I want to say to you is that these aren't just coincidences that occur. This is a fact that these individuals that are living near this facility have grown up with developmental disabilities. And I want to point out that since the operations have ceased there, it doesn't mean that the residents are still safe. The fact that there's a cleanup process, good, but it's still not enough. And I think that's what we're here to talk about today, the urgency of cleaning up and providing remediation for the residents of the County of Los Angeles and those that live and work in the vicinity there. They are exposed to a heightened risk of cancer and other illnesses all the time, whether it's outside their home, in the soil, in their playground, or at school, or around inside the home as well. We're finding that out. Children can't play outside their yards, and you know how young children like to play in dirt. So what do you think they do with their hands sometimes? They attach their hands to their mouth. And of course, they're going to be ingesting that. Exposure to high lead levels can cause, as you know, lead poisoning, which can affect the brain, the kidneys, the liver, and other organs, just as I pointed out with these 2 individuals. Children under the age of 6 and pregnant women, as you know, are at highest risk. Children are also at risk of lead poisoning from ingesting or breathing excessive levels of contaminated soils in yards and lead dust inside the homes. Lead poisoning permanently affects their growth, their learning, their behavior. In pregnant women, lead poisoning can cause high blood pressure, premature birth, and miscarriages. The bottom line is this: the homes that they live in are a danger to them. The ground below them is a danger to them. In fact, for these people in our community, their whole world is in danger because they live there and work there and play there. Let's hope that they can continue to live there. An estimated 7 million pounds of lead has been released into the air by Exide. Exide has admitted in court to numerous acts of felony misconduct. They were allowed to operate on a temporary permit for 33 years. I don't know anyone who would consider 3 decades as temporary. DTSC has publicly stated that up to 10,000 homes may be contaminated by the lead that was emitted from Exide's smokestacks. A tracer chemical known as antimony that is present during the lead smelting process that Exide used is what links this lead to the community and back to Exide. Antimony. I would encourage a member to ask DTSC to talk about that. Up to 1,000 of these homes could have lead levels of 1,000 parts per million or greater, which would classify the soil in their yards as hazardous waste, as defined by DTSC. And as you know, the county has no regulatory authority over Exide at this point. But however, due to the urgency, I felt compelled to introduce a motion at the County Board of Supervisors last year to request $2 million of additional funds to help begin with the interior and exterior rapid assessment of homes in this area. I couldn't stand hearing anymore about the inaction. And I think my board members there agreed and the community spoke, and we thought that was the best course to take. Not to say that we can take the lead on any of this, but to say we want to partner with the legislature, with you, with the state, with DTSC, and, of course, hold those responsible to pay back what is owed to our community. These are all important first steps for all of us to take to heart, and we are looking for you for that leadership. I just want to talk very quickly about the cleanup. We're here to work with you together, as I said. So let me allow you to tell you what that cleanup will require. Approximately 1,000 homes are expected to be identified by DTSC as priority 1, which means it's soil tested for lead content at 1,000 parts per million or higher. Only 191, as you heard earlier, of those homes have been cleaned up so far. That's the exterior. Only 48 homes have been cleaned inside the interior. And I do want to make a comment about that because some information that was sent out by, I believe, DTSC was sent to the community and was not in Spanish and actually served as a notice telling people if they wanted to have their homes vacuumed. Now, if I were to receive something like that in my home, I would say, someone's trying to sell me something. What's the urgency? What does this mean? Nobody explained that. And I'll tell you where that flyer came from. It came from one of my staff members who lives in the affected area. She was so appalled, she brought in the flyer. And we can share that with you at some other point. Since October 4th, as you know, only 4 additional homes have been cleaned inside. Since seeing that nearly 2 months now passed, the interior of only 4 additional homes has been cleaned is very distressing to hear. So when we talk about the action that has to be taken, I don't see, and I don't think the community feels that there's urgency. As you know, in the governor's budget, he's proposed $8.5 million to clean up these efforts. That included $7 million that had already been committed by TTSC to the residents at a public meeting last year. Unfortunately, this is far short of the amount that's needed for the cleanup. DTSC says that there could be 10,000 contaminated homes. DTSC also estimates that its cost is about $45,000 to clean the inside and outside of these homes. So you do the math. Eventually, the money must be recovered from all responsible parties. But these families, as you know, can't wait. They have been waiting too long. This problem, in my opinion, is urgent, and we need to match our efforts to meet this challenge. Today, we're submitting a plan to expedite that cleanup, and this plan has been prepared by our public health experts and vetted by community members. It's realistic, it's efficient, and most importantly, we believe it's achievable. Under our plan, with adequate funding, DTSC will be able to test all 10,000 of the potentially impacted homes within a year to assess their contamination. DTSC will also be able to immediately clean up all of the homes identified as priority 1, those 1,000 that we talked about, where the testing has revealed soil that is deemed hazardous waste. We're requesting that the state allocate $70 billion to DTSC for fiscal year 2016-2017 to begin the cleanup of the interior and exterior homes, starting with priority 1 homes. Remember, this money should be ultimately be recovered from Exide and others and restored to the state. The testing will tell us whether we need to clean more in the future, but no matter what, these residents deserve to know now. By doing so, you're sharing with your fellow Californians who for too long have been voiceless. We're here to be their voices. I want to thank you again for the opportunity to come before you and to speak, and to let you know that the County of Los Angeles will stand with those here in the legislature, as well as the state agencies and the governor. But action has to occur now. I thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. And we have the other 4 speakers on this panel. We start with the first and move along quickly because we do have a lot of other speakers and we have time for the public as well. But we thank you for coming from such a long way to speak with us today.